An old woman named Marfa lived in a small, forgotten village house at the edge of the forest. There were many rumors about her. Some said she was a sorceress, others whispered that she mourned alone for her lost family. But central to these stories was the door in her house. A locked black door in the far corner of the living room no one had ever seen open. It was said that something terrible lurked behind that door. Marfa warned everyone who came to visit to stay away from it. Even the children who teased the old woman knew one rule: not to touch that door. One day, late in the evening, when a thick fog had descended on the village, there was a knock at Marfa's house. On the threshold stood a young girl named Liza, a traveler who had lost her way. She asked to spend the night, and the kind old woman agreed, but on one condition. "You can stay here until morning, but no matter what happens, don't open that door." Liza nodded, though she was a little wary of the strange warning. She tried to distract herself, but all evening she felt as if something behind the door was calling to her, as if someone was staring right back at her. At midnight she awoke to a quiet whispering. The voice seemed to be coming directly from behind the back door. "Liza, open up. I'm cold." With trembling hands, the girl pulled the blanket higher and closed her eyes, trying to ignore the voice. But the whisper became louder and more insistent. "Liza, you're kind, aren't you? Help me." Curiosity fought fear. What could be behind that door? Someone locked it. She felt sorry for that voice, filled with pain and despair. Giving in to temptation, Liza cautiously approached the door. Liza stood in front of the black door, feeling the cold air rushing in from the cracks. The whispers behind the door grew louder, turning into insistent requests. "Liza, please open up. I'm freezing. I need help." Her heart was pounding, but curiosity and pity overpowered fear. The girl slowly reached out her hand to the old, rust-covered handle. At that moment Marfa's words flashed through her mind: "Whatever happens, don't open the door." Liza froze for a moment. But the voice sounded so pitiful, like someone was dying on the other side. She gritted her teeth and turned the knob with determination. The door creaked heavily, opening a few centimeters. In the same second, all the candles in the house went out. Darkness covered the room like a black blanket. Liza backed away frightened, but no sooner had she taken a step than something cold and ominous burst out from behind the door. It wasn't a person, just a dark, thick shadow with burning red eyes. It seemed to revel in its freedom, filling the room with a stinking fog. "You set me free," the voice wheezed, no longer pitiful but ominously triumphant. Liza rushed to run, but the shadow was ahead of her. She felt cold, icy fingers wrap around her wrist. At the same moment, a piercing scream sounded. It wasn't Liza. It was the house itself screaming. The door slammed shut with a deafening rumble. The darkness vanished, the light returned, and Liza saw that she was standing in the living room, but no longer alone. In front of her stood Marfa, looking younger than before, with an icy, unkind gaze. "You have made a mistake, girl," she said. "Now that thing is free, and you will stay here in her place." Liza tried to scream, but her voice was gone. She realized she couldn't move. In the mirror opposite, she saw herself. Only now it wasn't her. Her face was blank pale, and her eyes were as black as the shadow she had freed. Since then, a new legend has appeared in the house by the forest. The black door is always waiting for the next curious guest. Several months had passed since Lisa's disappearance. The village quietly lived its life, but the house at the edge of the forest became a topic of conversation again. The locals noticed that at night there were strange sounds coming from the house, whispers, creaks, and sometimes a sinister laugh. But no one dared to come closer. One day, a young man named Andrew came to the village. He was a photographer and traveler looking for unusual places for his pictures. After hearing from the locals about a mysterious house, Andrei became eager to uncover its secret. "Are you crazy?" warned the old-timers. "That house is cursed. After the disappearance of the girl, better not go there." But Andrei was too stubborn to back down. The next day, he went to the house. Coming closer, he felt a strange tension in the air, as if the forest itself was trying to hold him back. However, curiosity got the better of him. Once inside, Andrei immediately noticed the black door in the corner of the living room. It attracted his gaze like a magnet. It still showed traces of rust, and the door itself was icy cold. But other than that, it looked quite ordinary. "It's just a locked door," he said to himself, trying to calm his growing anxiety. But barely had he raised his camera to take a picture when a whisper sounded in the house. The voice was quiet, but distinct. "Andrei, you want to know the truth? Open the door." The photographer looked around, but there was no one in the room. His fingers trembled, but he did not leave. Going to the door, he groped the cold surface. Suddenly, it began to open slowly on its own. There was no familiar passage behind it, only thick, impenetrable darkness. Andrei took a step back, but a shadow, a huge one with burning red eyes, came out of the darkness. It swirled around him, whispering in a hoarse voice, "You have become part of our game. Welcome." Andrei tried to run away, but his legs felt as if they were stuck to the floor. Darkness engulfed him, and at the last moment he saw Lisa. She stood in the corner of the room, her face was pale, and her eyes burned with black fire. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered before disappearing with the shadows. Since then, the house has continued to wait for its new victims, luring them in with whispers and an inexplicable coldness. Andrei tried to run away, but his legs felt as if they were stuck to the floor. Darkness engulfed him, and at the last moment he saw Lisa. She stood in the corner of the room, her face was pale, and her eyes burned with black fire. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered before disappearing with the shadows. Since then, the house has continued to wait for its new victims, luring them in with whispers and an inexplicable coldness. Igor arrived in the village with a team consisting of 2 cameramen and a specialist in occult practices named Daria. Despite warnings from the locals, the team decided to spend the night in the house to find out what lurks behind the black door. Night 1, the team set up cameras in different parts of the house, including the living room where the back door stood. Igor had studied footage from other similar locations, but none of them had caused him such a sense of unease as this house. This door. "It's not just locked," Daria said, looking at the strange symbols barely visible on the wood. "It's a seal. It holds something very ancient and dangerous." Igor only nodded. He didn't believe in magic, but the feeling that something more than darkness lurked behind the door never left him. At midnight, the team began to hear strange noises, rustles, creaks, and then a familiar whisper. "Daria. Igor. You want to know the truth. Open the door." The cameramen tried to record the voice, but their cameras began to glitch. Interference appeared on the screen, and then images of faces none of them knew. Among those faces, Daria recognized a girl. It was Lisa. "She's warning us," Daria whispered. "But we can't do this." Night 2, Igor insisted on opening the door. His obsession with the mystery was growing by the minute. Daria protested, but the team supported Igor, assuring him that their task was to find the truth. As they broke the seal, the door swung open with a loud rumble. Behind it was once again only darkness. But now it began to literally fill the room, billowing out a stream of thick black smoke. "Run!" Daria shouted, but it was too late. The shadow that came out of the door began to engulf each of them. It wrapped around the cameraman, and his body disappeared as if dissolved into thin air. The second man was thrown back against the wall, and he instantly froze like a puppet. Igor tried to struggle, but he was paralyzed by the cold that seemed to penetrate his very soul. He had time to see Daria's face covered in horror before she too disappeared into the embrace of darkness. Afterward, the next morning, the locals found the house empty. All of the team's equipment remained in place, but the explorers themselves were nowhere to be found. The black door was locked again, and new symbols appeared on its surface as if the door was giving thanks for new souls. Since then, the rule in the village has been that no one approaches the house anymore. But the whispering behind the black door does not stop. It calls, persuades, beckons those who dare to enter. And yo, could you resist it? Several years have passed since the group of explorers disappeared. The house by the woods had grown into new legends, and now even ghost hunters tried to avoid it. But the fear of the black door could not stop everyone. New searchers appeared on the horizon. One of them was Artem, a programmer and blogger with a passion for mysticism. His channel about the paranormal was quickly gaining popularity, and for new subscribers he was looking for something special. Artem carefully studied the past events. He got Igor's recordings, which somehow remained on one of the servers. These videos showed the moment when the back door opened. Just before the end, however, the footage cut off, leaving only a gruesome phrase in a garbled font in place of the image, "Welcome home." Despite the warnings, Artem took it as a challenge. Equipped with state-of-the-art equipment, thermal imagers, microphones, drones, he set out for the house alone. Entering the house, Artem immediately felt an inexplicable silence that seemed to sink into his ears. Things inside looked as if someone had lived here recently. Fresh footprints on the floor, candles smelling of wax. But the black door, as expected, drew his gaze. He began to take notes, taking step by step closer to the door. Already, he could hear faint static in his headphones, and then a familiar whisper, "Artem, you've come for the truth."
The blogger took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. He set the camera right in front of the door and did the first experiment. He tried to record the thermal activity behind it. But instead of the expected data, the thermal imager showed something strange. A silhouette stood out in the shape of the doorway, which seemed hotter than any known material. Suddenly, all the equipment shut down. The darkness in the room thickened, and Artem heard footsteps. But not his own. Someone was nearby. "Who's there?" he shouted, but his voice echoed, as if the space around him had changed. The door began to shake, as if something inside was trying to break free. Artem, forgetting everything, grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Behind the door was no longer a house. It was another world, a vast emptiness with a red sky, in which the ruins that resembled ancient temples were piled up. In the distance, silhouettes moved in a way that words could not describe. Their shapes changed, their eyes burned, and their movements seemed silent. One of the silhouettes turned around. Its gaze pierced Artem, and he fell to his knees. A voice, deep and rolling, spoke. "You have opened the way. Now there is no going back." The next morning, local residents found the house empty again. Artem's cameras, laptop and other equipment remained untouched, but no one saw the blogger himself anymore. A new inscription appeared on the black door. "One more. Who's next?" The house continues to wait. They say it cannot be destroyed. Anyone who tries to set it on fire or tear it down disappears without a trace. The back door is still locked, but the whispers behind it grow louder. What about you? Do you have the courage to come closer? The village continued to live in fear, but no one else dared to approach the house by the forest. The rumors of the black door became a legend passed on by word of mouth. However, one day, on the quietest fall evening, a stranger appeared in the village. He introduced himself as Alexei, a researcher of ancient rituals and artifacts. His goal was not just to find out what was behind the black door, but to destroy the evil behind it. Alexei was no ordinary man. His knowledge of anomalous phenomena and ancient spells amazed even the most skeptical locals. Alexei spent several days in the village, studying eyewitness accounts and preparing his tools, amulets, ancient manuscripts, and silver shackles that he said could contain entities from other worlds. He warned the residents not to let anyone approach the house that night. "If I'm not back before dawn, leave. The house cannot be saved." With these words, he headed towards the cursed place. The black door opens again. Entering the house, Alexei immediately felt the pressure, as if the air had gotten heavier. The black door now emitted a bright, purple light that pulsed like a heart. The whispering behind the door turned into a low, ominous hum. "You think you can stop me?" came a voice, louder than before. Alexei didn't answer. He placed candles around the door, each made from a mixture of rare herbs and wax. Then he began to recite an incantation from an ancient manuscript. The door shook, and black, smoky shadows began to emerge from behind it. They swirled around Alexei, trying to stop him, but the amulets he wore protected him from their touch. As the spell reached its peak, the black door swung open and an entity appeared before Alexei, a huge shadow with fiery red eyes. It wasn't a man, or even a spirit. It was an ancient being, imprisoned behind the door hundreds of years ago to protect the world from its destructive power. "You are weak, mortal," the creature said. "Do you think you can lock me up again?" Alexei smiled, his voice firm. "I will not lock you up. I will destroy you." He pulled out the silver shackles, which began to glow as he spoke the last words of the spell. The entity shrieked and the entire house began to shake. The light from the shackles surrounded the shadow and it began to shrink, losing its form. When the entity was completely destroyed, the black door disintegrated into dust. Along with it, the house began to crumble. Alexei ran outside, having managed at the last moment. The old building collapsed before his eyes, turning into a pile of charred wood and stones. The villagers watched from afar. When Alexei returned, all he said was, "It's over." Since then, the place where the house stood has been overgrown with forest. Not a single strange sound or whisper was ever heard again. The black door and the entity behind it were gone forever. But in one of the ancient manuscripts Alexei had left behind was a note: "There is no absolute end. They will always find a way back."